All right, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome all to this Tiaka Koawa Rivers Group webinar. So I'm very grateful to have presenting today the chair of our committee, Dr. Heide Friedrich, and with her, Diego Ravazzolo from the University of Auckland. And so just a bit of introduction on our presenters today. So Heidi, she generously donates much of her free time chairing the Rivers Group. Professionally, she leads the Waterworked Environments Research Group at the University of Auckland, where she lectures and carries out research. And so Heidi is really the antithesis of the ivory tower intellectual, and she has 20 years experience in industry and academia, and has worked and lived in Germany, Taiwan, Scotland, Australia, and New Zealand. And I've always found Heidi really approachable and eager to discuss the topics she is passionate about. Diego is a researcher at the University of Auckland. He's a fluvial geomorphologist by training with special interests related to the monitoring of riparian vegetation and in-stream wood and the ways in which they influence our river systems. So in this presentation today, Heidi will outline the opportunities there are of working with academia in the river space and share her experiences on how academic education and industry requirements can be combined. In the second half of the webinar, Diego will talk about his academic research on in-stream wood transport and the dynamics in gravel bed rivers. Just a few procedural notes. The presentation will be recorded today, and I would like to ask the participants to make sure they're muted during the presentation, but I encourage everyone to post questions during the presentation in the chat, and I will note them down to put to our presenters at the end if time allows. We are on a little bit of a tight schedule today, so we may run out of time for questions, though I'll record those down and see if we can post answers to those on our Facebook page after the presentation. Just a reminder to keep yourselves muted again during the presentation to avoid any interruptions, and please do post those questions in the chat. So I'll pass it over to you now, Heidi.
Thank you very much, Hamish. And I would like to thank Hamish really for helping to organize those webinars the Rivers Group have been offering since May in a fantastic way. Today, we thought instead of purely having a technical presentation, we want to share how the Rivers Group might help to connect that the different aspects of industry and academic work. And I share my experiences mainly of working in academia, and there are so many different experiences. It is just one of many snapshots of what there is out there. And I start off talking about the partnership, and Diego will present state-of-the-art information of our research on in-stream wood, which we are doing at Auckland University. If we talk about partnering with academia, in Auckland, in New Zealand, we do have our 8 universities. And one might think, okay, there are the university, how do I go forward and actually work with the university? And that's where often the challenge comes in of, Hamish started with talking about the Ivory Tower, which is seen as something a bit, big but invisible at the same time. It's very difficult sometimes to make those connections in the Ivory Tower. And it's really, the challenge is to understand those kind of networks that exist, or the kind of networks people actually would like to see when working with academia. And it is really not any difference, somebody in academia who wants to work with council, with agency, with industry. It will seem similar, like a very difficult kind of network to negotiate. For the ones who are not working in academia, academia can be quite a centralized system, similar to the red network at the bottom. But the important thing to understand, even it is and seems centralized, on the other hand, we often talk about herding cats. So somebody in academia who might be in a position, being the node of a network, might actually feel very much powerless trying to herd those different cats. So how can we make those partnerships between academia, agencies, councils, and industry stronger? And it comes back to looking for a rather distributed partnership, and it is understanding those kind of connections which are taking place. And everybody who has worked with academia and who is not in academia understands the kind of tension that take place in that partnership. It is often about timeframes being very different in academia having very different flexibilities than councils and industry. Those kind of things I don't want to concentrate too much on about today in my brief introduction. I really would like to concentrate more on how can we find similarities in what is the same way how we describe success, concentrating on the people and concentrating on how can we work together to make the most of resourcing and funding which is out there. And besides having those different time frames and different flexibilities when working with academia, I think everybody is in the business of knowledge transfer. It is important to understand that for us in academia, a lot of how our success is defined is that we can provide evidence on how we advance knowledge. Whereas in my experiences working with councils and industry, it is a lot about applying still advanced knowledge, but it is more about how can we make use of that knowledge and help our projects and societies and so on. But I think that common aspect of knowledge transfer for us in academia, working with people, we do have knowledge transfer of our students. Working in industry and council, we want to provide the best environment for our employees. We want to provide professional development opportunities. So as I said, let's concentrate a bit, how can we really strengthen those partnerships whilst concentrating on the people working in those environments, and how can we make the most out of sharing resources and getting funding for our work. The important aspect for academia is really our connection with students. And so there is a lot of knowledge transfer in our classes, but our students are also exposed to research projects. We have different levels of students. We have undergraduate students, we have postgraduate students. Often it is common for academics just to look for data sets, look for just little problems which are out in industry or councils have, which we could use in smaller undergraduate projects. So that's something I really want to put the call out to the people who joined this call who are not in academia. Really think about any kind of little problems you have, little data sets, and try to make a personal connection to somebody in academia and see if they might be interested to have students working with those projects. And for council and industry, if they can develop relationships with those students whilst the students are still in academia, then those students will become employees later on. So it is really building those relationships stronger. And for the Rivers Group, we do want to help with making that connection between academia and councils and industry. So that is something where any organization such as the Rivers Group can play an important role with strengthening those partnerships. Partnerships, we do rely on using resources and funds, especially in our work with river engineering, river management, ecology, social aspects of river management. Just trying to get people together often requires funding to do so. And in general, for any kind of projects that are involved with academia, there are roughly 3 different ways on funding those partnerships. government support is really important. I will provide a bit more information on what that looks like. And it might be, again, sometimes I get the feeling that councils and industry are not fully aware of the opportunity that are out there to get actually government support to fund joint academic and applied research. The other important aspect for people not familiar with academia to know is scholarships for students are tax-free. And for example, a PhD student, somebody who has already their Bachelor of Engineering, Bachelor of Science, Bachelor in River Management, can be also Bachelor of Arts, any kind of undergraduate degree. A PhD project, it is in general for 3 years. And if a company would have $100,000 available, that could cover the tuition fees and scholarship for one PhD student for 3 years. And that really allows to spend time to build a strong partnership, to build a strong connection, to not only look at applying knowledge, but it provides time to also advance knowledge, which is often that differentiation with our academic research. And so that's something, if $100,000 or a bit more is often not too much money for a company to put into their budget, it is a really good way on building those strong connections. And the third aspect on funding is often the direct support by councils and industry. But with direct support, often there are a lot of overheads involved. So that's really concentrating about the people aspect again. Scholarships, them being tax-free, really allows an excellent source of making connections, building partnerships. If we have a look, I mentioned the involvement of government in funding. It is often that three-way collaborative work between academia, industry, and government, which is seen as the holy way of advancing really social economic aspect of society. And this plot shows quite nicely what is generally assumed to be the strength or the contribution of each of those entities. And today's talk, it is really mainly concentrating about that connection between academia and industry. But as I said, the government policies and the support they provide really enables a lot of that technology transfer, even if it might not be exactly in that kind of overview in where the government is associated with. And in New Zealand, we do have MB as one of our government ministry who do provide a lot of financial support for the funding. And I recommend everybody to have a look at this 2019 draft for consultation document. It is COVID-19 delayed the development of the updated strategy. So I'm sure the government is taking into account the changes which we experience nowadays with respect to COVID-19. But in this document, on top of outlining general possible strategies, it provides a really nice overview and introduction to how research funding works from the government side. And the important aspect to consider is that the government distinguishes between a spectrum from investigator-led research all the way to user-applied research. In the middle, they call it mission research. And as an academic, you are part of the big institution, but we also work, again, coming back to this partnership. It's not only that centralized approach of having everything done through the main hierarchies and channels, there are also a lot of competitive funding where individuals can try to get support for their ideas. And looking again at that, strengthen the partnership between academia and industry, there are a lot of research and development incentives. For instance, the Callahan Innovation Fund, where if a company or a council and academia want to come together, Callahan Innovation would cover 50% of the costs. So if I just said a PhD scholarship would be just over 100,000, Callahan Innovation would cover close to 50,000, with then actually a council or consultancy only having to cover another 50,000. So there are a lot of opportunities to work with those government frameworks, but often it is quite a challenge to understand those. And what I suggest, if anybody is interested in that river space to work with academia, contact the academic you would like to work with. And that is often already a challenge because it's again that ivory tower, right? How do you know the academics actually who are there? But I will come back to this in the next slides. So it's really, there are plenty of opportunities out there. To summarize that general introduction to how can those partnerships with academia be strengthened, we have to be aware of this centralized distributed approach, but we shouldn't be turned off by it. In my experience, I still recommend people to build partnership with the people you want to work with. So it is about understanding, have an understanding of the kind of environment, how decisions are made, but don't let that hinder you and think, I can't move forward with research because I might not know this main node in academia. There are still a lot of opportunities to strengthen those partnerships on a people-to-people level. And in my experiences, those are the partnerships who become really strong, and people obviously change positions, change areas they work in. But those partnerships, because they really were built on a strong connection, they survive those changes. Whereas if people try to make partnerships with the central node, often those are relatively weak partnerships. And once people change a position, go somewhere else, that whole connection will be lost. There is not one fits all solution, but this is just really my experience on working with academia. There are the hierarchies, and I'm sure there are similar hierarchies also in councils and consultancies. So we are working with it, but work with the people you want to work with. In regards with making this partnership successful, there needs to be some kind of investment. Investment can be different levels. For undergraduate research, just having access to little problems there are in councils, consultancies, having access to data sets is really useful. For postgraduate research, like a PhD, the funds for a PhD scholarship are relatively small compared to other costs there are for projects. And that really allows to build a strong partnership where outcomes can be substantial in regards to what the challenges are they are working in. In academia, a lot of people put emphasis on science communication nowadays, because we do understand working in this ivory tower, we are not as good as we should be to communicate actually that knowledge advancement or even just knowledge transfer out of the ivory tower other than to our students. And so, for instance, Diego and myself, we are active on Twitter. We use that as a way to communicate our science. And that is, again, a way for everybody who is interested to work with academia in this river management environment. Try to look at those social media challenges, look at the people who engage with those ones. It can help to make connections too. And as the Rivers Group, we are very much interested to help with making that connection. It is the connection about people if we think about the partnerships. So don't hesitate to get in touch with Hamish, myself, other people from the Rivers Group. Every committee member is on the website listed. And it is a body that can help just provide connections which otherwise might not be able to do. And ultimately, we all try to look after our water environments, ensure we keep them healthy, ensure we have resilient water systems. And I think strengthening those partnerships, having bigger collaborations, working with the kind of government frameworks there are a lot of opportunities to cover those needs to look after our water environments. So this is just, I thought, a quick overview of the kind of challenges I often observed when people try to build partnerships with academia. Again, it is a partnership, is all about knowing each other. So it is knowing about the different kind of systems there are in place. But I will hand over now this presentation to Diego. He will also share with you the state-of-the-art research that goes on in stream wood, a very topical challenge for New Zealand. And again, if you have any questions, definitely get in touch with Diego and see what how he might be able to help you. And I hand over to Diego now.
You might need your help unmuting.
Yeah.
Heide.
Okay, now I can. Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon to everyone, and I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about in-stream wood in Gravel-bed river. I'm an Italian researcher. In particular, I'm a fluid geomorphologist, and I'm studying in-stream wood dynamics since my master's degree in 2011. I have obtained a PhD in Italy, and then where I worked mainly in 3 gravel-bed rivers. After my PhD, I moved to Chile for a postdoc where I had opportunity to work in different environments, from volcanoes to Andean environment. And now I'm here in New Zealand, and I'm very happy to introduce to you the academic point of view of this important topic that is in-stream wood, especially the state of the art or the monitoring techniques for quantifying stream wood and determining its dynamics. And I'm very happy to talk about stream wood because generally river systems are considered as a simple interaction between water and sediment, but they are more complex. There are also riparian vegetation and stream wood. And in particular, riparian vegetation has a lot of functions in river. For example, it improves water quality, it provides habitats for different organisms, it helps absorb nutrients, it increases bank stabilization, and how it's possible to see in these 2 figures, and also from my background here, riparian vegetation, it's very important for supplying wood into the channel. And in turn, in-stream wood has also a lot of effects in river, especially it increases the complexity of the channel. For example, it creates physical structures. Then it has hydraulic effects. For example, it deflects the flow, or it can decrease the flow velocity. It has also geomorphic effects. It creates local scour and deposition, and these can help the dynamics of the channel. And also wood is very important because it enhances the habitat diversity. But so wood, when wood is stopped, everyone is happy. But when it moves, things change. And this is an example. There are 4 examples here of an extreme event called wood-laden flow. That is an interaction of sediment, wood, and water. And this is really extreme. And in these 2 graphs, we can see that the first part, the first phase at the front, the velocities are low, and there is there are a lot of interactions between wood and riverbed, and also a lot of wood collisions. And at the last phase, there are high velocities and high presence of water. This kind of phenomena happens also here in New Zealand. This is an example of an event occurred in 2018, where in Tologa Bay, where bridge was a lot of elements were transported and closed bridges and also covered breaches. And the key questions are: how much wood is transported during this phenomenon? How much wood is stored in river? What are the characteristics of the transported wood? What are the factors that trigger this phenomena? What are the impact forces to the bridge piers? To answer these questions, we have to know very well what is the wood budget concept. It's very simple. It's basically the balance between wood input and output in a certain reach of a certain length and over a certain time. In particular, the inputs can be due to wind, snow, fire, so natural episodic, or landslides, debris flow, avalanches, or human activities, or bank erosion. The outputs mainly are due to overbank depositions, and we have to take into account of decay factor and also wood transport rate. So all these factors can be monitored, and there are different techniques. For example, we can go to the field and we can measure the wood characteristics, for example, length, diameter, also the position inside the active channel, and the state of decay of the elements. If we want to understand the displacement length of the elements, we should paint or place metal tags before the event, and mark the position, and then go to the field after the flood events, search the elements, mark again the position, and we can understand the displacement length, the travel distance during the flood event. And also, we can understand the transport rate using radio frequency identification tags that are very small devices that can be installed into the trunk. And these devices send a signal to a mobile or fixed antenna. We can fix different antennas, for example, along a ridge. And we can observe when the element is passing close these devices. And we can obtain observation about transport rate and also displacement length and velocity, for example. And then we conducted a study in Italy where we placed also a GPS and RFID inside the blocks, a plastic box. We fixed this plastic box to the trunk, and we monitored the transport during the flood events. this is an example where a log could travel 64 kilometers during a flood event. And we saw that it experienced different temporary stops. Also, we understood that elements were transported during the rising limb of the flood event, and then they stopped at the peak or shortly after the peak, like here. And so these devices were very useful to understand also the incipient motion. So when the elements started to move during a flood event. If we want to understand the wood and measure the wood volume and also the porosity inside volume, there are different techniques. In particular, one an innovative technique is structure for motion. We can go to the field with a smartphone or an action camera, and we can collect pictures around an accumulation, and post-processing we can obtain, like here, a 3D point clouds, and from these 3D point clouds we can obtain the volume, the net volume, and also the porosity inside this accumulation. The same techniques can be also used by a drone, and we can survey a bigger area like this, and but we can also survey smaller large food accumulation. And another technique is terrestrial laser scanner. We can obtain the same, more or less the same information, but the terrestrial scanner is more expensive, and it has a different. It uses a laser to scan the accumulation of the elements and not pictures. And moreover, there are the satellite images that are very good to understand the position, maybe the elements, also the volume, but with less accuracies than structure for motion or terrestrial laser scanner. If you want to measure wood flux or transport regimes, video cameras and time-lapse images from cameras are very good tools, very good techniques. And we can understand the relationships, for example, between the amount of wood and the water discharge. And this is an example where a lot of wood was transported during the rising limb or the water discharge or the flood event. And also citizen size and web resources are very good. For example, video on YouTube or social networks are very, very important because we can understand different, very good parameters, and we can use this parameter to laboratory experiments, for example. Until now, I have reported only observations from the field, or only techniques that can be used in the field. But there are a lot of processes that are very difficult to understand in the field. And for this reason, laboratory experiments are very, very important. And in particular, in this experiment we conducted here in New Zealand, we placed this device, this black dowel, into a wooden dowel. This device has 9 degrees of freedom. We can understand the rotation, the pitch, roll, the yaw. So we can understand the movement around the 3 axes. And inside this device, there are accelerometer and gyroscope, and also a magnetometer. And now we are analyzing the impact forces of wood to parts of the bridge and also meshes like this. And here I reported an example of the relationship between the impact forces and also the dowel velocity. It's possible to observe, like, when the velocity increases, also impact force increases. Another experiment we conducted here at the University of Auckland is to understand a particular characteristic of wood. It's the presence of root words, and how the presence of root words can increase or decrease the local scour deposition at bridges. So we 3D printed root words and we plugged these root words to the dowels. We conduct experiment dividing the runs in two groups, one with root words and one without root words. After the flood, we use the same flow condition, we use the same quantity of wood. And after the simulation of the flood event, we conducted structure for motion to understand the bed topography. And from this information, we are analyzing now the volume of the scour and the position around the bridge. And here I reported also two examples. On the left, the run with root words, and on the right without root words. We can observe that without root words, the elements are transported slowly, and then with root words, also the disposition of the elements is randomly here. It's random here, and here it's more parallel and perpendicular to the flow direction. And these informations can be also analyzed with the device with 9 degrees of freedom. We can obtain information during the transport and the angle during the transport, also the angle when the elements is deposited to the accumulation. Also, laboratory experiments are very important to understand the scour, local scour and the position due to different rack designs. This is, for example, a vertical rack design, and this is an inclined rack design. And now we are analyzing the impact of material of different densities accumulated at rack, a vertical rack. We can observe here that light density, accumulation of light density creates very big scour in comparison to very high density. And the mix of the two materials experience something in the middle between light and dense. And what about riparian vegetation? Because at the beginning of this talk, I say to you that riparian vegetation is also important. And with laboratory experiments, it's very connected between them, vegetation, wood, sediment, and water. So with the laboratory experiments, we are able to divide these components, understand what's happened with only vegetation, only wood, and when the two components are playing together. And we conducted an experiment at the University of Hull. We divided the flume 3 channels, and here I reported an example where on the top there is vegetation and also there is large wood, and here it's the channel with only vegetation, and it's possible to observe very well that the dilution was completely different, and vegetation with the vegetation, the channels was more braided than vegetation plus wood. And as it's possible to observe in these 4 pictures, the processes observed in the lab are very, very similar to the processes in the field, in the real environment. So at the end of this presentation, I hope it's clear that the river is not only a simple interaction of water and sediment, but we have to take into account also vegetation and large wood, because vegetation, wood, sediment, and water play all together to maintain the ecological and geomorphic integrity and diversity of our rivers. And also field survey, there are a lot of synergies between field surveys and laboratory experiments. So we have to continue to conduct field surveys, obtain observation from the field, because are very, very important. And also continue with the laboratory experiments to understand different processes that in the field are very impossible to disentangle. And combining the two field surveys and laboratory experiments, we can improve river restoration strategy, for example, take better river management decisions. And here I reported a small video from 2005 from 2005 to 2016 in Tologa Bay area. It's possible to observe that a lot of wood is disappearing, and maybe a lot of wood is in channel now. And for this reason, we have to continue the field observation and laboratory experiments. And also, we can improve the design of in-channel structures, and also obtain ecological assessment, better ecological assessment. And very important, from laboratory experience and field observation, we can determine parameters, very important to improve computational models, to have an idea of, for example, of wood transport in a spatial, long spatial and temporal scale, different spatial temporal scale, and the interaction of wood with hydro and morphodynamic. Thank you very much for your attention.
That was amazing, Diego. Round of applause from John and a few others. A few virtual rounds of applause. So if anyone's got any questions for our presenters, please do post them in the chat. And there's not so many people on, so you could probably coordinate even people asking their questions in person. But I've got one from Alex James here, and Alex says, I live near the Manawatu River, where there are large erosion control structures that trap wood during high flows. The regional council removes this wood from the channel and burns it on the banks. Should they be returning the wood to the river?
Yeah, it's very good question, because I think I recommend use, for example, restoring restoring the rivers. For river restoration, I suggest to restoring the process of wood recruitment and on large scales, rather than replace, for example, wood again, for example, fixed structure of wood, because usually the river restoration is base fixed structures at rich scale. So this question, should they return wood in the river? Yeah, depends how, because if they put fixed structures in the river, maybe it's not the best solution, because we need to increase the natural process of the river, and we have to avoid known natural amount of the diversity of wood loading developing within streams. And so, yeah, I suggest to restore the process, then restore the resupplied wood.
Anything to add to that, Heidi?
Finding the unmute button. It is a balance, right? So I'm coming more from the engineering background, and if there is a damage, if infrastructure is damaged, then the outcry will be big of why did it happen. But at the same time, we do see that we have to look after our water environments. So it is really, how can we balance having resilient water supply systems and having resilient community, and that means reducing the hazards that are there, whilst we look after our environment. Connectivity is such a big issue at the moment, where we understand hydraulic structures they stopped so much biodiversity connectivity, sediment connectivity. And it's really the processes, they're so complex. We have a lot more tools to study those processes, but often we are getting rather lost in the details than understanding the main one. So I wouldn't have a yes or no answer.
Yeah, it's very much a depends situation.
Yeah.
Looks like I just got another question in there from Claudia Preen. And they say, I was wondering if I could get Diego's contact because I'm currently working on a monitoring program for a river in Ecuador. I work for a company that installs technology in the river to extract plastic waste before it reaches the ocean. This particular river is known for a lot of wood transporting during the wet season, and I was wondering if we could gather interesting data since we would already be gathering photos and other river data. So that's a cool opportunity.
Yeah, and there are plastics is very important topic now because there are during flood events there are not only wood but there is also plastic, and also for this reason we are analyzing now the different densities or accumulation. What can happen when different densities are accumulated. What is the scour due to different densities, and it's very important. Yeah, there is not only wood, sediment, wood, plastics. Yeah.
So Heidi, would you have people's email addresses through the registration?
Yes.
Yep.
Definitely, so Claudia.
Yep.
Yeah. Get Diego's contact details and.
Cool. So one from Phil Wallace here. Hi, Phil. Following on from Diego's conclusions, how do we go about translating the research into design and river management advice for practitioners, guideline documents, etc.?
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of design of different racks, rotation racks, or different design of bridges. The idea is to understand the catchment, understand the river before following a particular design. We have to understand what is the natural process of the river, and from there you can think what is the right design for a particular river, because it's very important to understand before the natural process than the different design that you have.
Right. Yeah, so we can still use Diego's work before we actually have a formal design guideline, and even if we do have design guidelines, we've always got to challenge ourselves because they may not go far enough. So Will Conley has just posted something up. This resource is pretty comprehensive for designing with wood. So a manual from the US Bureau of Reclamation there. I'm sure both of you, our presenters, are familiar with that. I've got a question just while anyone else is posting. So I was just thinking that there's probably a lot of practitioners around that would have observations and photos following flood events or just bridge inspections, river asset inspections, and I'm just wondering if you already have a channel for people to provide that information to researchers. It might be too much information for you. It might be useful, but just wondering how you like to receive that, or if you've got a process for receiving that already.
Yeah, it's very important. Yeah.
Twitter.
So it's definitely something. It is again not only the partnerships with council and industry, it comes back to that general science communication, right? And there is so much knowledge out there. us working in academia, we are always interested to hear and see those kinds of observations. What Alex mentioned, right? It's again so useful. I encourage everybody, email it to people. You know, there's never any academic who says, "Oh, why do I get this?" That is something we really enjoy, and a lot of what we're doing in academia is also, it's not only looking ahead into the future, we also go back in time. So that can become actually really important information for our work too. So definitely encourage everybody to share it with academics.
Great. I've got one more question, and I was just wondering for your laboratory experiments that you had undertaken in the UK. What materials did you use to represent the wood and vegetation in those flumes?
We use for the vegetation alfalfa seeds. It's Medicago sativa. It's the right name, specific name. We use that kind of material for the vegetation because it was able to maintain it was able to work with this vegetation until the end of the experiment. There's a lot of seeds died dead before the end of experiment, so it was good also to represent the right erosion of the bank. And for wood, just sticks of wood, all with the same densities. And we placed a cross of wood for representing the root words.
Right, cool. Okay, any more questions or comments from anyone? Yeah, they look like some really cool flume experiments, Diego, and I'm sure at some point perhaps we could even organize a more detailed talk for those of us who are technically orientated. It sounds like you could probably talk for days about that stuff, so looks really cool. Okay, I might wrap it up there then if there's no other questions, but I'd just like to throw it out to our presenters for any closing comments.
Diego, do you want to start?
Oh, well, I think it's very important for academic point of view. I think I represent, my talk was basically on the academic point of view, the state of the art, monitoring techniques. And I think it's very important to have also another point of view from the council or other point of view for the private sector. And we should, I encourage the share our knowledge, because a lot of times there is this gap, my experience, and I would like to encourage you to contact me or other colleagues, and it was a pleasure to show you what I'm doing, what we are doing, and because I'm not working alone. And yeah, it was very good for me, and it was a pleasure, really. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much, Diego.
Yeah, thanks again all for joining. And it is about making connections. We need to work collaboratively together. We need to be aware what people are doing. And, you know, Phil's question about how do we go forward now? How do we put it into guidelines? It is just not, you know, an easy, straightforward way to do. And we just need to exchange our experiences, our knowledge, and work together on it.
Cool. All right, thank you once again to both of our presenters, and another round of applause virtually. And I'm sure you can find links to publications and papers from Diego and Heide on the University of Auckland website if you just have a quick search on there. So we might post links to their pages on Twitter and Facebook as well. So thanks everyone, and
Thank you all.
see you for the next one.
Thank you, Hamish. Fantastic, Diego. See you.